60s and the 90s. They will be in conversation with Sarojesh Mukherjee, our very own Kolkata wala Sarojesh Mukherjee, who's an educationist with a fondness for vintage cars. I would like to invite the delegates onto stage. So over to you, Sarojesh. I would urge those who are standing to kind of sit down. Not bad, I expected Rachel.
Good afternoon, everybody. We have today on the stage two brilliant novelists, Rahul Bhattacharya and Rupleena Bose. And the way that we will be going about this discussion is that I'll first have some questions for Rahul, and then for Rupleena, and I'll tell you the reason why he goes first and she goes second. And then some questions for both of them. And perhaps after that, we can take some questions from you. Now, the topic is how do their novels foreshadow the India of today. So this discussion is not going to be about their novels per se, but in the way that the novels frame the India of today. And the reason for which I'm going first with Rahul is because his is set in an earlier time than Rupleena's. His is set from the 1950s to the early 1990s, and Rupleena's is from 2010 to the present. So let me dive in. Rahul, I am here, of course, referring to your novel, Rail Song. You portray the railways as a huge but integrated family in which is blind to race and creed and color and so on. And a large part of the book is about that. But you end with the Babri Masjid being demolished. It seems to me that it is a very definite authorial nod towards how the India of the period after that is going to be shaped. Would you agree?
Yes and no. Not to the last point, but something you said a little earlier. But first of all, thank you so much, everyone, for coming and not being part of the exodus before the last session.
Yeah, I think we are all very thankful for that.
We thought maybe there'll be 5 people left. Well, thank you. Also, one disclaimer, my back is in a really bad way. I did something to it over the last few days, and I've just popped a painkiller a few hours ago, and I'm a little bit woozy, so I sound spacey or say some absurd things. Just kind of take it in your strides.
You sound perfectly cogent, so
yeah.
Please.
My novel, as you said, spans the period from late 50s, early 60s actually to 1992. The railways, the point I was going to slightly push back on is whether that there's a kind of idealism to the idea of the railways. I do present it, I agree, in a sort of, I explore the metaphoric importance of the railways in many, many ways in Indian society.
Yes.
Including include the fact that it links all kinds of people with all kinds of background.
Yes.
But so much of the novel is also in the lives of the railway workers. And then you have to see, say, for example, caste. There is the kind of work that only people from a certain caste will do, which is, say, cleaning the tracks, cleaning
Yes.
manual scavenging, the lowest on the caste scale. The railways we know also in terms of communal chasm, maybe not necessarily in how it works out in this novel, but say Train to Pakistan, the railways are also carriers of the cleavages in this country.
Sure.
That said, it is a great unifying force in the sense it allows this country to become itself in a way that few other enterprises do. By traveling on the railways, we become
Indian citizens.
Indians. We become versions of ourselves. We become each other. Just
Right.
the fact that we share these spaces, we travel to other places, all of that. So now when we come to 1992, more to your question about that, was that one great cleavage which kind of undid all the other acts of harmony that the railways kind of articulates in the novel? I'd say not exactly, because we see the tensions building up to that all through the 80s, more in the case of Babri. So that this novel ends on the eve of the Babri Masjid, but we have a sense of what it is that was happening in the country that led people to express their passion in such kind of intimate terms, being able to mount a mosque, break it with your hands with hammers and crowbars, reduce it to rubble.
You also have You also have that part where Charulata is living in her with her in-laws in Bombay, and the parents of her husband are clearly into that kind of politics.
Absolutely. So, I mean, we think about now, like how families, friends, etc., fall apart because of where do you stand on Hindutva, Modi in the US, where do you stand on Trump, MAGA, etc. Right. These cleavages are enormous. So when you think about the 1980s, what would it have been, or what might have it been like to live through those times in your intimate spaces? I'll just say about Babri, the reason I ended there, I mean, there are literary reasons also. I didn't think the novel could take more. If you're writing in such granular detail over somebody's life, then I felt this was the right place to stop. But also, because given the theme of the session, I'll say that the India after 92 kind of changed in such a profound way. There is, of course, the passions that I spoke about that led to people destroying the mosque. And that animus, we've seen that play out in the last 10 years, and it's become the common sense of the country.
Right.
What was then seen as a shocking act.
Yes.
The other thing that happened is around that period is also the period of economic liberalization. So our idea of the material world has changed so profoundly. The way the foreign world comes to us, what jobs mean to us, what saving and spending means to us, what brands mean to us, all of that. And I felt, given the arc of this novel, this seemed like the right place to pause.
On that note, your novel spans the area of Nehruvian idealism and the importance of the central place of the public sector exemplified by the railways in that, whereas the India that we live today is now very different from, as you were just saying. Now, somewhere in the novel you say, you have a phrase to the effect of the secular scientific temper of that time. Do you think that we have simply lost that, or has it become something completely different? It's not just a loss, but it's a complete change.
So, I think the term I have there is the scientific temper, which was that kind of Nehruvian era term. And the reason it comes up in the novel is one of the main characters in the book, who's Charulata Chitol, she's my protagonist. Her father is this railway worker who's posted in this post-independence colony, which kind of embodies what Nehruvian India is like. So one of the things that he does is he his parents, Charu's parents, have an intercaste marriage, and because of that, he takes on the name Chitol. I'm sure it's a fish. I mean, unless you all are Ilish people in the audience, I'm sure you all will agree that Chitol is the greatest fish of all, and that's what he takes as their surname. But this kind of is a nod to his idea of egalitarianism, forward-looking, and a township like this, which is kind of not settled around the old patterns of caste and community networks, but an industrial, I mean, there's a workshop at the center of it. But a place like that also comes with its cultural alienation. So Unimesh's mother feels extremely out of place there because these same networks are not there anymore. And some of these tensions were true of Nehruvian India at large, that what we're trying to move into needs us to leave something behind, but can we afford to leave that behind? We have the attachments to them. They serve their own social purposes. And what are we doing here with each other among all, in an entirely kind of a way of life that seems in some ways almost ranged against what we know.
Yes. Let me come now to your character, Charulata Chitol, who's absolutely delightful. I mean, this is a character which has been penned with such great sympathy, and she's a wonderful fictional character that you have come up with. Which leads me to this question, Rahul, that she is central to the novel, but she is not important in any scheme of things. In the railways, she is a medium-level worker at best.
Even junior clerk, senior clerk, welfare inspector. I mean, that's her range.
She struggles with her academics. Her family is very, a railway family. So, I think you say it explicitly somewhere that, alluding to her, the fact that she's not of any great consequence. Was it important to see or to perceive the period that you have covered in your novel from the lens of somebody who was of that, who was that character, of someone of no great consequence, as opposed to someone much grander who would have had a different view of what India was then and what it was going to be?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this also goes to the heart of what a novelistic project is. That what a historian might tell you is how things happened, why they happened, what happened even. But a novelist will tell you what it felt like.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Let me also say I was actually surprised to be told it's a historical novel. It first came back to me by the American editors because I thought I'd written a character novel, as you said, which it is. But in discovering the character and taking her through this long span of time, it became, so many little things of history, not just the big events, but the small things that make up the daily life of living in another period, permeated into the novel that I suppose by accident I had written a historical novel. The question as to the vantage point, I think it's really important for us to reclaim history from the great man narrative and the great person narratives. History it is not only a thing that's by them, for them, of them.
Absolutely.
History is like life.
As it is experienced.
Exactly. And that is where the kind of the novelist's excitement lies. What does something look from this angle? From this, in my case, a young girl, when she kind of runs away from her house just after the seismic rail strike of 1974, when that fervor takes over the township and Indira Gandhi has let the police and the army, etc., loose on railway workers. What does it mean for a young girl who has a mind of her own to be living, kind of negotiating that? What does it mean for somebody working in the government workforce in the 1980s, as Charu does, for her to encounter the rise of the battles for caste equality? Because in that period, there was the movement for greater reservations, There was the Prevention of Atrocities Act came up, I think, in the late 80s and 90s. Those things then make her kind of come face to face with her own privilege. I mean, she's an underdog in many ways, but she is the fact that just by being in general caste is a thing of extraordinary privilege. And so those kinds of societal, broader questions then become more intimate in the life of a character, and that's what we relate to as readers, as watchers of film, etc. What does it mean? You mentioned the family discussions. When you marry into a conservative family, how does the conservativeness of your in-laws, your husband, how far can you challenge it? And if you do, what are the consequences? I think these things happen all the time, and it was really exciting to be able to kind of do it through a character in her life.
And you've done it wonderfully, if I may say so. Now, my final question for you for this phase is of your other novel, the sly character of...
Company of People Who Care.
The sly company of people who care is of the lives of indentured slaves who go to Guyana, and they mold Indian culture over there. Now, in that sense of things, which is completely different from Rail Song, India or Indianness does not relate to any geographic landmass, but becomes a part of global migration and diaspora. To what extent did that foreshadow the India of the next decade? Or not the next decade, of the future?
I mean, I'll make a general point about migration here, and perhaps this is to do with my own story, my life, because there is so many cultural inheritance in me. If I just go back...
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, so I'm, of course, Bengali from my father's side, but only. Borishal, father's father, Hooghly, father's mother, both of them several generations ago moved to kind of northern central India. From my mother's side, across the width of the subcontinent, the heart of Saurashtra in Gujarat, my mother's father, and Surat, my mother's mother. She grew up in Bombay. My father was born in Kanpur, grew up in Pulgaon and Nagpur. I was born in Bombay, childhood in Secunderabad, then much of my life in Bombay. Now I live in Delhi. My wife, who's here with my two daughters, my wife is Assamese, and in fact, we're going from here, we're going to take the train to Assam, the inaugural Vande Bharat sleeper, which I'm told is vegetarian only. And yeah, and I'm glad that the Calcuttans have kind of taken issue with this. It's an odd kind of thing to go from Kolkata to Guwahati, any train, it's just an all vegetarian service. Anyhow, I digress. But I mean, so because of this, I think I've always been interested in the idea of dislocation and migration and what is lost, the gaps, the holes, the vacancies within us when this happens, but also the creativity, the prospect of these various energies rubbing up against each other, the fact that you're also an outside, suddenly I'm much louder, I'm sorry. How this idea was probably seated in me before I even wanted to become a writer. And when the novel he speaks about, the sly company of people who care, is set in the Caribbean in Guyana. When slavery was abolished, the British then had a kind, slightly milder version of slavery. They called it indentured labor. And they had like these small contracts in which they took workers, coolies as the Indian workers were called.
Many of them from here.
Yeah, the ships left from Kolkata and from Madras, and they were largely drawn from the Gangetic Belt.
Yes.
And just think about how profound that migration is. You're going across the world. You actually have no sense of this, where you're going, what you're going to do. And you reach this place, and then you're interacting with other kinds of people who you have never encountered in your life. A lot of them are freed Africans. And then there were the small number of workers from Portugal, of course, the colonial overlords.
Yes.
What is your idea of India? What are you holding on to? A lot of them carried seeds of trees from their villages in little bags of cloth, which they planted there. When the Indians die, a lot of them bury their navel string under the peepal tree. I mean, just think of what this means to them, right? What
How
is
they're
home?
clinging on.
Yeah, but in these encounters, so there's a lot lost, it's very difficult, but there's also some kind of creative energy. I mean, just to give you an example, I was at a literary festival a couple of months ago, and G.N. Devi spoke about languages. He said the more polluted a language is, the more alive it is. So just at the level of language, so much was going on. At the level of culture, when you think of chutney music, what's it's taking, I mean, I don't know whether you all have heard, it's like Bhojpuri meets Caribbean Calypso, and it's kind of put through a mixer. I mean, that's one example. So I would disagree, for example, with V.S. Naipaul, who famously and provocatively wrote, "Nothing was created in the Caribbean." And so the question is, have I answered it? I'm sorry.
I think you have. I was...
The India that we create, the India that we have are not necessarily the ones we live in, but then the ones we end up creating for ourselves.
Yes, that was my point. Let me talk to Rupleena now for some time. So just to give the audience a very brief idea about what her novel is about, it's the coming of age of a young professor.
Temporary professor. Temporary being a very key point here,
Yes,
English professor.
Yes. And she also writes.
Yeah, she wants to be a writer, but it's also about class. So, it's not easy to just want to be a writer and become one because you have livelihood to worry about. So that's the dilemma,
Yes.
yeah.
And so she's Bengali and from Calcutta, but she lives in Delhi. And she doesn't get to enjoy life too much for reasons that we will be discussing. One of those is the fact that you refer to the trickle-down effect of, which is a phrase borrowed from economics, from politics to education, resulting in a lot of disquiet and strife in the educational sphere, including the silent campus revolts of that age, of 2010. Now, today, things in campuses are often flashpoints for much greater things. To what extent do you think those events that you have portrayed in your book foreshadowed these events?
Yeah, so just to give a brief background, essentially my novel is set around a decade. It spans a decade, which is 2010 to 20. It ends in 2020. And, primarily, it's about the personal and the political. We often talk about, in theory, in philosophy, we use the words personal and the political very often. But here what we see, what interested me towards this protagonist is that somebody who's got very strong sense of observation. And that comes from the desire to be a writer and the inability to be a writer, which is not an easy profession. It's not like you don't grow up and go to school and, apply for a job and become a writer. You have this entire sort of nebulous industry to sort of negotiate. But what she does is that she's also an educated girl, so she is also studied literature. So she becomes a temporary teacher, which is a source of livelihood. Through that, what she realizes and what she sees is the way in which the country is changing, and the academia, the college or the university is a microcosm of the country, right? I mean, what you see in student politics, in university politics is also what you see sometimes, the way it changes in the country. It's almost like the university is out there and the country is, outside, and each is a mirror of its own. So what she sees is basically, the polarization in the university, and that polarization also stands for a metaphor of what is happening in the country. But that is not just what it's about. It's also about seasons, which is the interesting part. I personally found it very interesting, which is that how do you look at seasons in the decade of a country, So, the seasons also sort of reflect politics, student uprising. There's the famous saying, the student politics of 1968. For example, the student movement, and it ended suddenly. There was nobody in the campus because they went for summer vacation. So those are some of the things she refers to. She tries to understand when she is looking at what is happening in the country. And of course, it's about like crack down over free voice, over academia, particularly literature and a lot of things what literary studies stand for. And that's something which you see slowly unfold over a decade, basically, from 2010 to 20.
Yes, carrying that thought forward, your novel starts with the pollution in Delhi and ends with the onset of the pandemic. Now, do you mean this environmental degradation to also be a metaphor for the decay in general, in whether it is in politics, whether it is in morality, whether it is in society, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, actually, yeah, you're right. Pollution comes in the center because actually my novel starts with spring in Calcutta, which is a very beautiful time, actually. Yeah, yes. No, it's fine. So it starts with spring, and so it starts with the air, and sort of it ends with air. So broadly, air is also a metaphor of time, of movement, of basic rights, all of those things which you see, and of course of apathy in a way, apathy towards climate, apathy towards air, which is what you see today. And somewhere in the middle is when, around the time when things are changing, election is coming, that's the time we start talking about the pollution in Delhi, which is not just about pollution, which is again about many other things, about, the air which is clogging people's hearts, the air which is sort of making you myopic in a larger sense. So I use it like that, yes. And of course, it's also a way of differentiating the cities. So my novel goes between Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay, and a little bit of Edinburgh. And the air is something which is different, changing, and it's also looking at the way in which each of the city is, each of the two cities are responding to the change in the larger country.
Right. Another aspect of your novel is the instability in the educational professions. You said a few minutes ago that the protagonist was not just a professor, but a temporary professor. She clearly doesn't make enough. Her profession is not really respected by her husband or by her friends around us. And this has only worsened since the time that your novel has been written, or the time that it covers. So would I be right in saying that too anticipates an idea of India or the reality of India?
When I wrote it, it wasn't, when I, obviously, you imagine a fictional universe, but when I wrote it, a lot of things, the way it is today, it was not the same, particularly in academia. But one thing is sort of remains, which is that somebody who teaches literature is often considered not serious or not serious enough. That's the normal perception that, it's not like science, physics, economics, or, it's an observational. You're reading novels the whole day. You're writing about novels. I mean, is it your hobby? Is it your pastime? And as, of course, somebody who studied literature, it's something that I have also faced. And I think that was something that I really wanted to talk about, because what it allows you, what studying literature allows you, is also a sort of softness. It allows the ability to see things in a way which a lot of other people, I'm sure they see, but you feel that they don't see. And you're also a minority. Not everybody talks about stories all the time. Not everybody sees stories and real and your life breath. So that is one thing which is what I wanted to mention, particularly in the case of this protagonist who's a teacher. The idea of it's not just being a temporary teacher, it's a temporary teacher of English literature or literatures in English, which is a very specific identity to have, which you would know. I remember a lot of academic friends says, oh my God, you represented us. Like nobody's represented us in India. Like in that sense. Of course, not nobody, but that's one of the things which people often say.
A novelist also has great insights. A sentence that I told you a few minutes ago will forever stick to me in memory, which is, this is not a very characteristic sentence in her book, but in the sense that it talks about a happy place. It goes like this: the streets of Calcutta looked like a fair that sold happiness. So this is an insight that a physicist or an economist or a mathematician is unlikely to come up with. Yeah. But anyway,
also true of the streets of Calcutta, you know. Like, I want to say that my daughter, who's also come here with me, and she's somewhere here, she probably got bored. But the first thing that she said, that every time she comes to Calcutta, he says, Mama, Calcutta streets are the most beautiful. No other country, she's saying country, no other country or city has such lovely streets. There's so much to see. So there is, I think that, and this is like now, she said it day before. So clearly there is that feeling of something unfolding out there, which I think Calcutta has, yeah.
Let me come to one of the central events in your novel, which is the murder of a Muslim student, Salman. There can be no doubt, I hope you will agree, that this is something that does look forward to the India of what happened in India next. Yes, you would agree?
No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, though, of course, it's fictionalized, and it comes at the center of the book in a way, because it's you're basically looking at a protagonist over 10 years, which is mine is a quiet kind of a book. Not great events of history are not happening. They are happening. They're filtered through one person's observation. But what changes in this protagonist's life is when the polarity and when violence comes really close inside the campus, inside. And then it's like a point of no return. When violence comes this close to you, where do you go? Then you are changed forever. And I think that's what happens, that she is also changed forever, as well as people around her, I would say. And that is the central point, yeah, in that sense.
There's another very striking place in your novel, which is called Nilokheri, which I initially mistook to be a fictional one, but it is a real one, as you told me some time ago, and that's where the protagonist's grandmother goes. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so there is a sub-story which sort of, which lies in the, it's like a subplot. It is like something which is like brewing throughout the narrative, which is the story of this protagonist's grandmother. And it is a story which she also has learned in parts, which is about this, which is about her grandmother leaving. It's about, the novel is about belonging. It's about memory a lot. And Nilokheri is a place which is near Karnal. Interestingly, it was a post-partition settlement, rehabilitation settlement, which was in the time of actually, Nehru. And so a lot of people who were artists from Calcutta and Shantiniketan, on the insistence of B.C. Dey, I think, who did the first, panchayat, the early panchayat years. So he basically took this bunch of people, a large number of people actually, who were artists and craftsmen from Shantiniketan. And they went to Nilokheri, where this settlement was established. The settlement, the purpose behind it was to help the people who had come from the other side during post-partition, and to sort of help them heal. And art, and very much like the years after the Second World War, in fact, where literature was used to heal soldiers. So here, art was meant to heal, to distract these refugees, and to make them, to help them make crafts. And it was supposed to be, it was imagined as a utopic settlement, What happened, interestingly, in real life is that the project failed, because it was just, it was Nilokheri, it was near Karnal, somewhere in the middle of dairy farms. It was just too far away from, urban, or, from Bengal, from Delhi, and Delhi was also very different. It was a post-partition city. So the failure of this settlement also led to the silencing of this entire, story about Nilokheri, which, interestingly, I found by chance because of a family member who told me that about this, that there's this Nilokheri, which was a completely separate novel which I was writing, which was like this grand partition novel. But then I started writing some of them, and then I realized that, this is the story which has to come here, which is the story of the past, because how do you talk about India of the present or India of 2010 without referring back to 1947 or post-partition, particularly in the case of Delhi?
So to digress for a moment, are you still writing the Great Partition novel?
Yeah, I'm allegedly writing the Great Partition novel.
Well, we hope it'll...
yeah, eventually, I guess.
We certainly hope it'll see the light of day. One final question that kind of summarizes everything that we've been talking about. Your novel, would you agree, is a very dark one? There are very few embers of hope. Everything is not optimistic. In fact, somewhat like Rahul's novel, but more so in your case, things are taking a turn for the worse. To that extent, does it foreshadow today's India?
I guess. I don't know how to answer that, honestly. I mean, I'm sure it's a dark novel, but there are, like, you know, there are...
Just 1 second to clarify. By dark, I'm not saying at all that it is any worse for that.
No, of course. I hear you. Yeah, I was, you know, also the moment when I was writing, I think that sort of, maybe that makes it darker as well, because I remember when I was beginning to write this novel, it was a very different kind of a time. It was the years after the pandemic, which is why I thought of the decade which had gone by, and which led me to think about decades and how life, politics, reality, you know, a decade is a very short time, yet it's a very long time. So it's one of those, you know, you can only understand, I think I felt, a country or a civilization or a society when you look at the 10-year span. Right. And that was the moment which probably made it dark, but there is flicker of optimism, particularly in the streets of Calcutta, I think, and I kept it constant. You know, it starts with a happy spring in Calcutta, and it's there, I guess.
I have two questions to which I want both of you to respond. Both of you have female protagonists. Charulata Chittal in your case, and your nameless...
Unnamed, yeah. Could be anybody.
Temporary English department.
Yeah.
Was it, or not was it, does it make a difference to see it from the female gaze? Would it have made any difference had your main protagonists not been female? Or what difference does it make? Why did you choose to have the female protagonists? You first, whoever.
Yeah, of course. It would have been an absolutely different novel. It was, yeah. Why did I choose? I mean, this is a question I do get quite often. The fact is that I didn't set out thinking that I'm a male writer who's going to write a female protagonist. I had a vaster idea of like what I want to do with this novel, but I realized I don't have the central character that I want to place in the situation. And then I had to start discovering her. And then that process of discovering Charu, which was initially came to me instinctively, that became the entire novel. Of course, the gaze, everything that every one of Charu's experiences in the book, she's somebody who has such an active engagement with the outside world, comes with a charge because she's a woman. Because even in the smallest way, she's always trespassing. If she leaves her quarters without telling anybody, that would be an act of trespassing. If he goes out in the night till the end of the lane, that's trespassing. The fact that she goes out to earn, I mean, of course, there is the greater trespass of running away as a teenager across the country. But even in smaller ways, when she starts working, that's an act, that's a violation of what families expect from you. So she, in fact, hides it from her guardians when she starts working. The fact when she becomes a welfare inspector and she travels all around the country, sometimes in dangerous situations.
Yes.
These are jobs that very few women do. It's basically because you have to be available at any time. You have to go travel rough, travel at any time. You have to all parts of the country.
Mother-in-law objects to that and so on.
All kinds of people are always objecting. So each of these things gives the novel a certain charge. With if I had to write it in male character, it would be an entirely different novel. I mean. Maybe I would have kept the Chittal. That's about the only...
That's a marvelous thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were you saying? Yeah, the female protagonist. Yeah. No, in fact, I set out with the purpose of writing a female protagonist. I was very clear about that because I had earlier written something which I had scrapped. And I remember feeling underrepresented. You know, I remember, in fact, one of those moments was I was like, I would read Elena Ferrante, I would read Rachel Kask, and I would wonder that why don't we read about, you know, an observant, you know, critical, quiet woman who's also like, you know, across cities, who's also like looking at other people, who has a very perceptive eye. You know, we don't have those protagonists. I mean, I couldn't find it in the urban space. Of course we have, when I mean we don't have it, it's not like it doesn't exist. But it was something that I wanted to look at specifically. So in fact, my starting point was that what would a woman be thinking if, she had to be English teacher, which was a starting point, temporary teacher, and how would the world be unfolding in front of her? Because it's also a sort of a divided self. You're studying literature, you're teaching literature, you're talking about books and stories, and there is life around you, which is so feudal. So you're talking about modernity, outside is feudal India. So that was one of the reasons why it had to be a woman protagonist for me. And now, of course, no.
And a reader does get the sense, after reading your novel, that it's for the good that the protagonist is female, because had it been male, perhaps it would not have been all that much layered or nuanced. It's difficult to think about a male protagonist going through all that your protagonist does.
Yeah, no, Summer of Then is entirely I think it belongs to a female. It needs to have a female voice. Yeah. Having said that, the next one I've decided, a male voice now.
My second and last question for the both of you is that both of you have written about the past. Yours of a slightly older past, yours of a more recent past, but still of the past. Now, looking back at the past, is it just and these particular pasts that you have written about, from 2010 onwards for you, and from the 1960s onwards for you, for India, looking at these particular pasts, is it just nostalgia for the kinder India that was once there, or is it also a reflection that things were brewing during those times that frame the India of today?
Yeah, definitely things that were brewing, because when I was writing it at that point of time, it just seemed, it's like, odd example is, I teach Shakespeare. So everything that he was writing, he was using a different time, but he was also like guarding it. He was also using references of Elizabethan England without referring to Elizabethan England. So that's one of the strategies which novelists have used forever. I think that is one thing that I use. So it's 2010 to 20, but it could be now, like it could be today. So, but you need to set it away for a certain amount of distance to also prevail for the reader, I think, to look at the time, to look at that moment, to look at the politics of it, I would say. Yeah.
So I have to say, I have nothing against nostalgia. I'm quite fond of nostalgia myself, but I realize its limitations. It can be one layer. It can't be the whole thing. It's a very incomplete emotion.
I agree, yeah.
And it can be a cop-out for writers. When we read writers, we want something deeper than nostalgia. Is it a kinder society I write about in the space of the novel? Perhaps yes. Some of it is because so much more has come to the surface. A lot of what was kind of kept within us, maybe it was only a sense of decorum or shame that kept it within us. But that can be useful, and now it's kind of been unleashed. So that's that. What was the second part of the question? We're looking for kinder India, and how does it?
Or is it a time where you can find, the embers of disillusionment and all these troubles brewing?
So that, of course, we see that throughout.
So it's not a binary. It can be both.
Yes.
I agree.
Definitely.
I mean, nostalgia also needs to be negotiated, what he says. You can't just unleash nostalgia. So sometimes the past and the present both have to coexist.
I mean, what does it mean finally? Nostalgia, I feel fondly about something. Okay, then what?
Then what? Yeah. What about that? How do we go on?
I'm afraid we have run out of time, but since I had said questions and answer, we will have time for just one. So, yes, lady. Two? All right. Two. Yes, the girl. The lady there.
Thanks a lot for that very interesting discussion. I have I know it's been talked about in the discussion as well, but I was just wondering, when it's such a breadth of historical events that shaped our nation that we're talking about in Rahul sir's book, how do you treat the line between the personal and the political? Because not just political, they're social, political, cultural events, and they shape us as people.
Right.
So what I'm trying to ask you is that how then was this character a personal, was she looking at all these events and negotiating it personally, or was it also something historical in that sense? So the fact and the fiction.
Sometimes I wonder whether it's worth us flipping around this question rather than asking why is it that we are bringing the political into the personal, could we instead ask, is the elimination of the political from a person's consciousness an act of illusion? Are you kind of denying the intelligence of this person? Are you making them more limited? Because you think the world of the novel shouldn't be kind of encompassing the ideas of what you feel about things around you. So to me, and my project was pretty much building the consciousness of this character from the time she's 3 till her mid-30s. And if that is your project, and as I mentioned earlier, she's somebody who has like a very keen connection with things around her, the world around her, I thought it was my duty as a novelist to be able to examine her consciousness as it kind of goes along, if that makes sense.
So one last question for Rupleena, please. Anyone has it? Doesn't look like it. Oh, gentleman over there. Please keep it short. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for briefing. My first disclaimer is that I have not yet read your novel. I just heard from this discussion. And the metaphor that you said, that the degradation, our values, everything around us, like air, that air is getting polluted, so our values. So that is a nice metaphor.
Would you please get to the question?
Yeah. My question is that would you ever think of writing something which will talk about the world, say, in future?
It's a very good question because just to also about the air, I started the novel with air. That was the first line was in my head when I started writing it. It was about air because it was the pandemic where suddenly, everybody was saying that you can't breathe the air, the other person is breathing. And there it was, when you look at another time when air is, air is something which gets you closer, air is something which wants you to move further away. So and it's a common thing, it's what connects us, we're all living in that air. So that was where I started the novel, and of course this is not dystopic or this is not science fiction, but having said that, in my recent writings, when I am thinking of the present time, instead of locating in the past, I think that, something talking about current politics or talking about current life, climate, maybe the future is a very important location to sort of talk about things which are going on today. So yes, one could always, it's something that a novelist could always sort of can explore, particularly in the present day, I would say.
It could also be said, as he has pointed out, we have in fact written about the future.
Yeah, that's
writing about the past.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here. I hope this has been interesting. Thank you, Rahul.
Thank you very much.
Rupleena.
Thank you so
all
much.
for being here.
Thank you.
Are we doing do we have to go somewhere for signing books, etc.?